Hello, everyone. Hope everybody is having an okay day and they're not losing their minds. We've been laughing at ridiculous stuff today. I nearly choked on my tea at something that wouldn't make any sense to me earlier, but there you go. I hope everybody is staying safe, mostly staying indoors, and keeping themselves busy. Here I am again today doing my little contribution for anybody who's interested. Let's continue on with The Reaper and the Scribe, Chapter 6. It was around 5 a.m. when Alicia's worst ever night's sleep was ended by Doris Watson shaking her arm. "Come on, girl. Time to start." Alicia was disoriented and didn't realize where she was for a moment, but as the smell of that tiny room filled her nostrils and the awareness that she wasn't alone on the makeshift bed hit her, it all came flooding back. Tears welled up in her eyes as her bottom lip began to quiver. "Don't start all that crying again. You have work to do," said Doris. "I need to go to the bathroom," whimpered Alicia. "Bathroom? Such words I've never heard. What are you talking about, girl?" replied Doris. At this point, Jamie had awakened and pointed to the bucket in the corner of the room. Doris saw Jamie point to the bucket and said, "If that's the bathroom, you can go empty it because it's nearly full." The look of absolute horror on Alicia's face as she stared towards the bucketful of human waste would have won an Oscar if she had been an actress. "Go on then, do what you have to do, and then throw it overboard. That's a good girl. We have breakfast to make. This is what you will be doing from now on," Doris continued. I'm not doing it here in front of everybody," sputtered Alicia. "Well, go do it outside then. But watch the rats. They are very hungry at this time of year." Alicia just wanted to die. She couldn't take any more. Albert had also been awakened from his slumber and said, "If you don't want the same as you got last night, you'd better do as you're told, because if a little slap on your behind didn't set you straight, I will take my belt to you." Jamie and Alicia looked at the 4-inch wide belt around Albert's girth and then looked at each other. Alicia picked up the bucket with both of her hands and struggled up the steps and onto the deck with it. She climbed off the boat and then reached back over to pick it up again. Unfortunately for her, she didn't get a hold of it properly, and it dropped back onto the deck. The bucket stayed upright, but some of its contents splashed up onto her face and clothes. Inwardly, she wanted to scream out loud, but was beginning to fear Albert and did not want to incur his rage again. Quietly sobbing to herself, she lifted her dress and sat her tiny, pampered bottom onto the cold, wet bucket and did what she had to do. Upon finishing, her stomach wrenched, and the small amount of food that was in it was ejected into the canal. Alicia openly cried on the canal side. She was bent over, looking at the reflection of herself in the canal. "How can I carry on? No one can live like this. I will run away. Yes, that's what I will do." Standing back up, she dropped the empty bucket on the floor and started to walk away when a voice in her head stopped her in her tracks. "Are you sure that you want to do this?" Alicia Winters, I am giving you a chance to redeem yourself. I was about to give up on your kind because of people like you. I decided to see if you could change. I can stop this experiment now and leave you and your kind to the Reaper. But that, Alicia Winters, is for you to decide. Alicia looked all around her, but no one could be seen. The foggy, cold winter's morning increased the depression Alicia was feeling. "What the hell do you want me to do?" screamed Alicia. A tall gentleman wearing a top hat and a cloak asked if she was all right. "Who are you?" said a scared Alicia. "Atkinson's the name, madam. I am an accountant. Do look after your future and listen to what the voice in your head tells you." The tall, elegant gentleman bid her good day and walked on, disappearing into the fog. Alicia was left with a chilling feeling of doom after speaking to the accountant, especially after what he had just said. Her mind was racing. "I can't take any more of this," she thought, as she looked back at the boat, picked up the empty bucket, and returned to its gunwale. When Alicia returned, Jamie and Albert were having their breakfast. Jamie then stood, putting on his jacket, and said, "I'm going to get off now." Albert wished him luck and said, "Remember, boy, 6 days." "I'll remember," said Jamie. Alicia screamed out, "Please, don't leave me here, Jamie. I beg of you, don't leave me here. I need to tell you something." "You are going to have to sort everything out yourself, Alicia, without the use of money, bank cards, people running errands for you, or your BlackBerry." "There are no blackberries this time of year," said Albert. "I know," said Jamie as he went to give his sister a kiss on the cheek, but then decided not to when he saw what was on it. As he left, he looked back at Alicia and gave her a reassuring smile. "I will see you soon," he told her. With that parting glance, Jamie was gone, and Alicia was alone with the strange, out-of-touch, aggressive people. She pulled herself together and said, "Okay, obviously this is some sort of penance that I must endure for reasons that I cannot think of. Let me stop this fine speech you are giving, Miss Alicia," said Albert. "I was under the impression you thought I was Alice," she snapped. "You couldn't hold a candle to that sweet child of mine," retorted Albert. "In what way is your Alice so different to me? Apart from her hygiene, that is." "What is hygiene?" asked Doris. "I mean, she wears filthy clothes, doesn't bathe, and she smells," snarled Alicia. "We work in a constant cloud of coal dust. That is the smell of hard work on her clothes, a thing you know nothing about. Alice is a useful part of this boat crew. Ask yourself this, young lady. Have you ever been useful to anyone for anything in your entire life?" Albert awaited a reply. Alicia just stood there, trying to think of a time, of a single instant when she had been useful to someone. The realization was not one single instance came to mind of a time when she had been of use to anybody. What Albert had just said is what the people back in her own century really thought of her. Alicia began to cry. Not like before. These tears were real, as the depressing thought of how people really thought of her hit home. This time, Albert didn't scold her for crying. He simply looked at Doris and gave her a wink. Alicia looked at her tattered clothes. She now shared the same aroma of her Victorian counterpart. She looked at Albert and Doris going about their daily routine and began to think, maybe this isn't a dream. What if this is really happening? Why has Jamie just left me on my own? Albert went topside and stood at the helm, thinking of his own daughter in that horrid place that had spawned such a self-centered creature, and wished for her to be back, along with her brother. Alicia looked at Doris, mapping the lines of her aged face and the dark shadows beneath her eyes, and wondered about living a life in a time where growing old was the norm. Sadness fell upon her, and she couldn't work out why. For the first time in her precious life, she pitied someone. She then looked around at what Albert and Doris called home. She tried to conceive how they could be happy, living an existence without money, possessions, going out to dinner with friends, or a new car every year. These were proud people, proud of their little business, their horse, but most of all, their children. Alicia recalled the last telephone conversation she had had with her mother, complaining that her father was horrible, and her mother saying she would make him pay. Alicia just stood and hung her head. Doris looked over at Alicia and wondered how such a pretty young girl, with all the privileges she had, could be so useless and miserable. She thought of Alice and missed her very much. Alicia looked at Doris and said, "Sorry. I have the feeling you have never been truly sorry for anything you have done in your entire life," said Doris. "Are you jealous of me, or do you simply hate me?" asked Alicia. "I don't hate you, and I am certainly not jealous of you. I pity you." "Why would you pity me? I can have anything I desire." "That, my girl, is the very reason I pity you. You make no sense whatsoever. I made a pinafore for Alice yesterday for her birthday. It made her day. She was as happy as could be because I gave her a present. You have no idea of what that feeling is. That makes you a poor girl, not a rich one." Alicia thought of the apartment her father bought her for her birthday, and the fact that it wasn't enough for her, and she asked him for a car as well. She also thought, how could anyone be happy receiving just a dress for their birthday. Her mind was not understanding any of this. It was my birthday, too. What? Said Doris. Yesterday was my birthday, too, she repeated. Doris dried her hands on her apron and said, I hope your next one is better for you. Now, how about a pot of tea? The smallest of smiles came to Alicia's lips as she said, I will make it. Doris was taken aback and said, Here's the kettle. As Albert stared into the distance over the empty hold of his canal barge, he was trying to work out what was going on, but nothing Albert had ever learned could explain his current situation. He was brought back into sharp focus by a tap on his shoulder. Startled, he spun around. To his amazement, Alicia stood there with a pint pot of tea, which she offered to him. What's this? Said Albert. Tea? Replied Alicia. Thank you, Alicia. Now go thank Doris for me. Doris is having a nap. I made it for you, replied Alicia. There is hope for you yet, he said, with some trepidation as to the contents of his favorite mug. All this is as strange to me as it is to you. I don't know why you are here, but here you are. All I know is, while you are here, you have to do as we do, said Albert in a stern but calming voice. As they were talking, 3 young children walked past the barge, and all of them looked at Alicia. Their gaunt, dirty faces, their rags that were loosely tied together with bits of string, their bare feet seemed to affect Alicia the most, and she turned her head away. She recalled the boots she had just bought and realized the amount of money she had paid for them would have been enough to have clothed hundreds of these poor children. She was finding pity in her up until now closed, cold heart. She began to think about her penthouse and the tiny space Albert and Doris had brought their family up in. She was trying to work out how they could be happier than she. Then suddenly it came to her, my happiness relies upon possessions, and this is the sum of my life. What are possessions? Inquired Albert. Alicia, not realizing she had just spoken out loud, gave a little cough of embarrassment and said, They're things that you collect and they make you feel good about yourself. I see, Albert said. And if you do not have these possessions of yours, you cannot feel good about yourself? Alicia hung her head, not knowing how to answer. For here was a man with nothing at all, as happy as a man could be. And the worst thing was, she could not understand it at all. Albert continued, You see, young Alicia, the only possession anyone needs is the love of their family. And you don't need to be a king or a fine gentleman to have that, because the thing that is most important in life is free. All you need is love, eh? John Lennon preached that, and look what happened to him. Alicia's words covered up the turmoil she now felt inside. Recalling all the bad things she had said to her father, and yet he just kept on loving her. Worst of all, she was thinking about her mother, and the stark realization that she was a carbon copy of her. Don't know a John Lennon, but I do know Arthur Lennon. He's a good man. Works the other end of Leeds, Liverpool Canal. Good singing voice, as I recall. Just 3/4 of a mile away, Jamie was standing in front of the building that in the 21st century he owned. He was amazed by its newness and immediately began sketching it on the empty notepad in John's coat that he was wearing. He noticed the railway line actually ran through the building and not along the outside as it seemed to do in his day. He kept drawing until someone came out and inquired about his actions. "I'm looking for work," said Jamie. "You'd better come inside, lad," said the gentleman. As the two men entered what looked like the offices, Jamie noticed a painting on the wall of someone he recognized. It was a likeness of Matthew Murray. The man who had brought him inside noticed Jamie looking at the painting and said, "He was a brilliant engineer." "I know. I've studied him well," said Jamie. "Have you now? You don't look the educated type to me. Judging by your appearance, I was about to set you on in the boiler room shoveling coal," said Jack Hawkins, the works engineer. "I studied engineering and history," said Jamie. "History? What we are doing is new and exciting, lad. I'm not talking about building wooden ships and hay carts. We are building engines that are powered by steam," exclaimed a puzzled Jack Hawkins. Modern history," said Jamie, realizing his mistake. "I learned modern history at university, sir," he continued, instantly knowing the hole he was digging for himself was getting deeper by the minute. "University? And the father who sent you to university also sent you to me, looking like a ragamuffin?" inquired Mr. Hawkins sarcastically. "I want to be an engineer, sir. I want a hands-on experience of using steam as a power source," replied Jamie. "Okay, Mr. University Man, show me what you have learned in your history class," said Jack Hawkins. Jamie saw some drawings of a steam locomotive on the desk. He quickly looked over them and then proceeded to name all the component parts of the working engine. He gave a full description of the steam pistons and was moving on to the boiler when Jack Hawkins stopped him. "How can you know all this at your age? An awful lot of what you just told me is privileged information. Where did you learn it from?" "As I said, sir, at university. I dress like this because my family has fallen on hard times," replied Jamie. "In that case, I will give you a start, young man. Now, first things first, what's your name?" Thinking quickly, Jamie answered, "John Watson." He didn't want his name showing up on historical records. "Well, John Watson, you can start next Monday." The engineer was interrupted by Jamie. "I can start right now, if that's okay. The sooner the better for me." "Keen, eh? I like that. First, we will see if you can work. If I'm going to take on an apprentice, I want to see what you are made of." Jamie was taken out of the office to a stepladder just to the side of the main workroom, and both men climbed down the stepladder into the building's cellar. The cellar was cold and damp and illuminated by 3 candles. Normally, it would have taken Jamie's eyes a while to adjust, but the dim light of this era made it so there was hardly ever bright light due to the smoke and soot emanating from the tall chimneys of Unslet and Olbeck. As the 2 men walked towards a wall that needed some attention, Jack Hawkins said, "What do you know of bricks and mortar. "I can lay bricks," was Jamie's confident reply. "There you go then, lad. Fix that wall today, and if you do it right, you begin your apprenticeship with me, and we will put that university knowledge of yours to some practical use." After Jack Hawkins had left the cellar, Jamie surveyed the wall to see what was needed. He knew he could do the job, because this part of the wall was still standing back in his time. The first thing he did was to write the note that Freddie would read on that fateful night of his sister's birthday. As he laid the bricks one after another, he reached the part that needed the painted brick, and, to his delight, laying on the floor was a single white glazed brick, which he placed into the wall that he was building, and carried on until the 6-foot square part of the wall that needed attention was finished. He then made his way back up the ladder, knowing that the letter for Freddie was safely placed behind the white brick for him to read 164 years or so later. Back at the canal, it was all systems go, as Albert had decided it was time to do some much-needed repairs to the barge. Assembling his crew, he wasn't surprised to see Alicia was not as willing as the rest of them. He set young James on with polishing the horses' harness brasses and to groom Toby. Doris already had the mops and buckets ready in preparation of the cleaning duties. She handed a mop and the bucket to Alicia. "Do you know how to use one of these?" she asked. "I have absolutely no idea," said Alicia. Doris shook her head and looked over at Albert. Albert gave Alicia a disapproving look and said, "I don't suppose you have ever made a pot of tea before, but you seem to have the technical knowledge on how it's done. With that in mind, they might want to think again, lass." Alicia grabbed the mop and bucket and thought to herself, "They'll want me to cook for them next." "Right then, Doris port side, Alicia starboard." That's the right-hand side," said Albert with a smile. The two women set to their tasks. Alicia was amazed at how industrious Doris was for her age. She thought of her own mother and wondered what she would do in a case like this. She quickly realized her mother would simply break down and cry. She also realized that that was exactly what she had been doing since she arrived there. This was a pivotal moment for Alicia. She already knew she was a carbon copy of her mother, and thought then and there that she had to change. The trouble was, she liked her life and her way of living, so she would go along with this stupid life until she returned to some sort of reality. "Alicia, that will never return. You are running out of time. Take heed of what these people teach, or feel the reaper's icy breath on your neck along with the rest of humanity," were the chilling words that came into her head. The voice was sweet and tender, but the threat was real. Alicia suddenly looked shocked and very quickly set about her cleaning duties. Although Doris was way in front of her and her arms were painfully aching, and this work was so beneath her, she began to feel something that she had never felt before. She was actually feeling proud of something that she was doing. This was hard toil, which, until she had arrived at this period in time, she had never known. This is grubby work for grubby people, and not someone like me. But all the same, This counts as something, she thought to herself. Albert had climbed into the hold and started checking for weak spots. Tapping with his hammer, he made his way down the long sides of his pride and joy, checking for differences in the sounds his hammer was making. Alicia, although still feeling unhappy about having to go through this, had now rolled up her sleeves and was working for the first time in her privileged life. She looked down into the hold at Albert tapping away with his hammer, then across at Doris wielding her mop. The result of Doris's work was plain to see. Alicia looked at her own hands as they gripped the mop and began to understand that Albert and Doris were practical people, and everything they did had to have a practical use. She saw now why Doris had removed her fingernail extensions. It would be wrong to say that Alicia wasn't worrying about her precious fingernails, but their not being there was making it easier to take on this work. Her unmade-up face now showed an expression of understanding. "A penny for 'em, lass," said Albert. "I was just thinking about what my friends back home would think of me now, if they could see me." "Never you mind what your friends would think. I can tell you this, your family would be damn proud of you," encouraged Albert. "I am sure my father and brother would be proud of me, but my mother would be disgusted at the fact that I had lowered myself to do such a menial task," she replied. "Seems to me it should have been your mother accompanying you and not your brother," pondered Albert. Alicia let out a shriek of laughter and said, "My God, the very thought of my pampered mother being here right now and doing what I am doing, well, it's just unthinkable. The thing I don't understand is why my brother is here. I think I am here so I can see what being poor is like. I don't really understand why I have to see this, but Jamie is not like me at all. He is a good man who has never lusted after money or influential friends in his entire life. Maybe it isn't what Jamie has done in his time that is the reason he is here. I think he is here to do some good for himself in the future and to help somebody in this time. Don't ask me why, but I think he is here to help my son, John," said a thoughtful Albert. "How can Jamie help John when John isn't here?" asked Alicia. "I think Jamie is starting the life that John wants to live, but didn't know how to go about it," explained Albert. The conversation came to a halt at the arrival of Doris, bearing 3 pots of steaming hot tea. "Now then, you two, I see am I not stopping you both from working? Standing there chatting like there's nothing to do," laughed Doris. "What's happened to James?" "The last I saw of him he was running down the towpath with Toby," said Alicia. "I don't know. All that lad wants to do is play," said Doris, shaking her head and going after her wayward son. This was another moment that made Alicia stop and think, for James was just a boy, and in her world it would be perfectly natural for a boy his age to be out playing. She had noticed that none of the children she had seen on the canal side had actually been playing. They were all working, and for some reason this was beginning to make her feel sad. It also reminded her again of how spoilt she was in her privileged life. "I suppose my life is quite privileged," she thought. "No, Alicia, your life is a wasted life of indulgence and greed. What you witness here is real life, real suffering. both of which you know nothing about.
Who are you? And what do you want? Screamed Alicia.
I am your future, if you have one, but that future will depend upon your ability to change. You will hear my voice no more, as I have helped you all I am willing to. Now, everything rests on you changing your ways, especially when you get back. I thought you said I wouldn't get back. Alicia will never return to the 21st century. The conversation, taking part partially in her head, ended with those chilling last words. Albert never flinched when Alicia screamed out. He just drank his tea, as if she hadn't raised her voice. Alicia was left pondering on what was the point of all this if she wasn't going to get back. With that in mind, she decided to try to change. Otherwise, she would be stuck in this place till the day she died. That particular train of thought began another way of thinking, and how if she ever got back there, things would alter, starting with her mother. Alicia had seen Albert and Doris sitting on a makeshift chair laughing together, and she tried to think, when was the last time she had seen her parents sitting together, laughing? Maybe if they could witness what she was seeing, they could change too. Her thoughts moved on to getting back there, to try to change things a little. Once the tea had been drunk, it was all hands on deck again, and back to work. Albert was laughing at the sight of young James being brought back to the boat by his ear, with his mother saying, "I'll give you running off with Toby when there's work to be done, my lad. Now get hold of that bucket and come with me." Albert looked at the pensive Alicia and said, "What did you do when you were a young'un, lass?" "I was at school with all the rest of the children," replied Alicia.
"Bloody hell! How long did you stay at school in your time?" asked Albert.
"Until we are 16. We can then stay until we are 18, if we want," informed Alicia.
18?
"I had been working 12 years by the time I was 18, said Albert. "Yes, Albert, but not everything about this age is good," said Alicia.
"That's the first time you've called me Albert. We are definitely making progress," he said, placing his flat cap back on his head.
Alicia just gave him a knowing smile. The family resumed their work and continued through until it was lunchtime. It was lunchtime in another part of town, and Jamie suddenly thought that he had not brought anything to eat with him. This, of course, did not dampen his enthusiasm, because he was now climbing the ladder back into the actual works. He saw Jack Hawkins standing by one of the machines, talking to a worker. Making his way towards him, the engineer pointed to his office, so Jamie diverted his walk towards Jack Hawkins' office. A minute or two later, he was joined by the engineer.
"Now then, lad, I hope you've finished your work, because you've been down there a while," said Jack Hawkins. "Indeed I have, sir," was Jamie's reply. "Good lad! We shall check your work after lunch. I did notice you weren't carrying a bag of any kind when you arrived this morning. Have you not brought any lunch?"
"I'm afraid I never thought of lunch. My head was too full of finding a work position for me to think of food."
"It's your lucky day, then, because my wife has packed me up far too much food for me to manage by myself. Would you care to join me?"
Being powerful hungry after his bricklaying, Jamie replied, "How very kind of you to offer, sir. I would be most grateful."
Politeness. I do like that.
I don't get enough of it from the usual people that I sit on here. I think I'm going to enjoy teaching you, and unlike most I've met whilst I've been the engineer here, I think you will profit from my teaching. You appear to be different from the rest in your age bracket. Can't quite put my finger on it, but you are different, said Hawkins. Thank you, sir. I will do my best not to let you down, said Jamie. The two men finished their lunch of bread, cheese, and ale, and made their way back down into the cellar. Jack Hawkins looked closely at Jamie's new brickwork and inquired after the white brick that was lying right in the center of it. Jamie explained that he had found it on the floor and had assumed that it had been in the wall in the first place. Jack Hawkins nodded his head and patted Jamie on the back, saying, "Excellent work, young lad. Your apprenticeship will start tomorrow, as agreed. I will see you first thing in the morning. I cannot abide lateness, so be here for 7:30, and not a minute later," said Jack Hawkins as he bid Jamie good day. Half an hour later, Jamie returned to the barge and asked, "What's happening here?" "I thought while you were doing what you need to be doing, I would use the time to make some much-needed repairs," announced Albert. "What a good idea, Albert. I don't start until tomorrow morning, so I am at your disposal for the rest of the day," offered Jamie. "I was hoping you'd be able to help me," said Albert. Jamie smiled at Albert and said, "Of course I will." He caught sight of his sister. "Working? Is that you, Alicia?" Jamie now doubted his sense of sight as he saw Alicia emerging from a cloud of dust, rubbing her nose. "Very funny," coughed Alicia. "Why are you back so early?" she continued. "Because I don't start properly until tomorrow morning," he replied, still looking bemused. "Have you been working, Alicia?" he continued. "I have been working very hard all morning, and I will have you know that I hurt all over," she retorted. "And a good job she's doing, too," said Albert. Jamie looked upon his sister with different eyes. She was covered from the top of her head to the tips of her toes in coal dust, and she wasn't complaining about it. "Well done, Alicia. I'm proud of you," said Jamie. "Thank you, Jamie," was Alicia's reply. For the first time as well, she saw her brother with different eyes. "This patting on the back of each other is all very well and good, but it's not getting the job done now, is it, my lad?" announced Albert.